So I'm working on a book right now on Canadian urbanism. People have written about Canada from a bunch of perspectives, often rural, sometimes policy, government, but no one's ever talked about Canadians being an urban people, and something like 80% of us, give or take, live in cities or in suburbs, rather than the traditional Canadian way of thinking of ourselves as out on the prairie, or a fisherman leaving Peggy's Cove, or somebody conquering the Rockies. Most of us have suburban lives, urban lives. We go to Costco, or we go to a coffee shop. We use subways. We get stuck in traffic jams. So I want to write a book that kind of reflects Canadians as they live now, chapter by chapter, looking at some of our big cities, from St. John's in New Brunswick, St. John's in Newfoundland, St. John in New Brunswick, all the way to Vancouver, and the big ones in between. And I think my theory is that we have a lot more in common than we don't have in common as Canadians. So some of that old Canadian regionalism, where we're, East is pitted against West and rural against urban, if we can start thinking of ourselves along this common thing, this common thread that we have of urban living, maybe we can get over some of that and kind of stitch the country together a little bit stronger. Huh. When most people look out their door, they see a city of some form or another. But the idea of city, of Canadianism that they're given, has always been rural, with a few exceptions. You got Mordecai Richler, talking about Montreal, and Ondaatje writing about, old Toronto in the skin of the lion, and a lot of newer writers it's finally catching up. But that traditional image is still pretty heavy, and it's a hard thing to shake. So people think they're a rural people, that we've conquered this land and the last spike and all that. But we're a Costco nation.
So how do we shape that image?
What I want to do is just talk about the cities from a sidewalk perspective, and get people excited about Canadian cities. I think there's a particular way Canada has done urbanism, done our cities. We haven't let our cities crumble in the same way cities to the south have. So I think there's some value in thinking about what is it that has kept our cities together. How can people of all different ethnicities and cultural backgrounds and economic backgrounds live in relatively the same proximity? That isn't to say there isn't problems in Canadian cities, and some of those problems that America's had in the last 30 years are starting to appear in profound ways in Canadian cities. But maybe starting to think about why. How come Toronto, how come Vancouver, even Montreal, which had so much, it was hit so hard economically over the last 30 years, how come it's still a kind of vibrant city downtown?
Right. And why is that? Why doesn't Canada have a Detroit?
I think it's a particularly Canadian thing that we don't let stuff slide. We don't, we have this idea of ourselves as supporting the social safety net, which whether or not we do is debatable. But I think an unspoken part of that, something that we haven't talked about, is there is a physical manifestation of our kind of evening out, our economic situation, whether it's giving to have-not provinces or Medicare. We haven't let any of our cities slide. So it might be the concrete version of socialized medicine, in a way. Well, a lot of Canadians think that we don't have a history because we are a newer country, and we're a colonial country. So we've been delivered the stories of other places, whether it's Mother England or France if you're in Quebec, and then we became a de facto colony of the United States. So their story is told, whereas our stories, sort of remain in the background. They pop up in high school history classes and in lit classes, but they're not told en masse. And so we have this impression that we don't have history, though we do, but that might be an okay thing, because it gives a lot of people here a lot of liberty to make their own history. You go to a place like Paris or Edinburgh, where the history is so thick and deep, physically with the buildings you look around, but just deep in literature and myth. It's really hard to do something contemporary in those cities. Where you come to Canada, a lot of our cities are sort of blank slates that everybody gets to make the history, make the city, make the future, it's open, it's a lot freer than some of those European cities. In terms of excitement, I'm always loyal to Toronto because this is where I live. And right now it's exciting for all the bad reasons. It's never boring here. I mean, God bless Rob Ford for making municipal politics extremely exciting, whatever the outcome is. But the exciting places in Canada, I think, are a place like Calgary. And you look at the mayor that they elected, and it goes against all the prevailing notions or stereotypes people have of the West, and especially Alberta. They elected this progressive, city-minded, city-building mayor in Calgary that speaks all the things that all the great mayors around the world talk about those kind of small economies and livable cities, walkable cities, all those great things. And because it's happening in Calgary, a place that's totally unexpected, the most unexpected place maybe for it to happen in Canada, it says that there's shifts in how Canada's traditionally been defined, and the shift is along urban lines. So it's a real signal to watch, not just Canadian cities, but especially a place like Calgary. It's going to be, I think, our sleeper city.